Bear with us as I let some folks here in from the waiting room and you all get connected. We'll go ahead and get started. My name is Ginny, and I am the events director at Anderson's Bookshops. We'd just like to take a moment to say thank you for joining us tonight to talk about books with us. For those of you who aren't familiar with Anderson's, we are an independent bookstore outside of Chicago. We have been owned and run by the Anderson family for going on 6 generations, which actually makes us the oldest single family run bookseller in the country. So we're pretty proud of that. We have to start thinking about our 150th anniversary coming up soon, which is a crazy thing to say in the world of bookselling, but we can continue to have that sort of a legacy because of your support. When you come to these events, when you come to our stores, when you shop on our website, you support us in a way that means that we can continue to offer these kind of events and we can continue to be a part of your community. So though COVID has been difficult for everyone, for small business, for books, it has been also extremely difficult. So when you join these events, it really just gives us a warmth in our hearts. And we just like to say thank you for that. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you to visit our website or follow us on our social media pages to find our complete events calendar. We are doing virtual events like tonight. We are also next month wading back into some live events, some in-person events. So please do take a look at that to find maybe your next one. A couple of highlights. Margaret Atwood in conversation with Judy Bloom. James Patterson and Dolly Parton are going to talk about their event. Douglas Preston and Lincoln Child. Those are all virtual events that are happening in the next couple of weeks. In-person live events, we've got Bob Odenkirk, Brad Meltzer, and Paul Holes are just a few of those coming up. So take a look. Quick accessibility note, we have turned on the live transcript feature. So if you'd like subtitles or a full transcript as provided by Zoom, you can choose that using the live transcript or the CC button at the bottom of your own screen. But today we are so happy to be celebrating the newest book from Noah Hawley, Anthem. I would like to welcome my colleague here, Sue Bushman, who is a bookseller extraordinaire at Anderson's Bookshop, and she will be in conversation with our author this evening. Award-winning author Noah Hawley is one of the most accomplished auteurs and versatile storytellers working in television, film, and literature. Over the course of his more than 20-year career, Hawley's work as a novelist, screenwriter, series creator, showrunner, and director has garnered acclaim, winning an Emmy, Golden Globe, PEN, Critics' Choice, and Peabody Award. As a best-selling author, which is of course how we know him best here at Anderson's, Hawley has published 6 novels: A Conspiracy of Tall Men, Other People's Weddings, The Punch, The Good Father, Before the Fall, and of course, the Anthem that we'll be talking about tonight. So welcome, Sue and Noah. Thanks so much for being with us tonight.
Very welcome.
So I'm going to turn it over to you guys to talk in depth about how much we love this book. We'll get to some Q&A a little bit later, and I'll be back for that.
Well, Noah, want to welcome you to Chicago. I'm sure this weather is quite a shock to you. Or maybe it's not. I'm not sure where you came from, but I want to tell you what a pleasure. Say again.
I've been bouncing around the country a bit, but you know, my favorite words in the English language are sweater weather. So I'm more comfortable in the north than the south.
Well, that's good. You're going to need your sweater for sure.
Yeah.
Wanted to tell you how much we've been enjoying selling Anthem. I brought it home again today because I wanted to review a little bit before I talk to you about it. I enjoy so much the topical nature of the book, and I know that's what I tell people about when I sell it to them. I wonder if you would have a comment about that, how somehow the issues you talked about coincide so well with what's going on in our country.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge, right, when you're writing any story, one of the first things you have to figure out is the when of it, right? Is it, when's the book set? Does it take place today? Does it take place in 1950? You know, what is the story? And I had this thought in writing it that I wanted it to feel relevant to a reader when they read it, you know, let's say 2022. But that then it became this huge challenge to figure out, well, what's America going to be like in 2022? You know, I was starting in 2018 or 19. And so that was the challenge, was both, you know, figuring out where we were in that moment when, you know, we seemed to have entered Twitter time where reality was shifting, you know, from moment to moment, and to just kind of project and see where we would end up. But, you know, a lot of the issues, you know, a lot of what I talk about in the book, which is very much about the anxiety of young people, you know, and the world that they're inheriting, a lot of it is not just that the climate is changing and we're in this political discord. It's the fact that grown-ups, they seem to know that the climate is changing, but they don't seem to be doing anything about it, right? Like, because it's easier to focus on the soap opera of human events and the outrageous things that outrageous people say, and the polarization, when the real problems are so much deeper and larger. So some of it became about just balancing the long view of their lives with the immediate circus that we were living through.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly an interesting idea for those of us who are older to think about the fact that we are turning over the world that we see here today to the young people, and the responsibility that's going to land in their laps by virtue of the fact that we're all going to die off.
Yes.
And what will they do with that?
Yeah, and how do we equip them? I mean, my children who are 14 and 9, they have to answer a question that I never did, right? Which is, how do you prosper in a world in which reality is different for different people, right? I mean, we had the Cold War when we grew up, and we had, some real issues and the war on terror and all those things. But now, how do we guide them to move through a version of where, what I say when I mean freedom and what you say when you mean freedom might be two totally different things. How do they move through this land? And so the book, as an adventure story, a page turner that takes, people on this quest, this journey, almost like a fantasy novel, almost like The Lord of the Rings or The Stand. It's just, instead of Mordor, you have Texas or California or Oklahoma, or, the parts of this country presented not in some satirical way, but just how they seem to be to me when I travel around.
Yeah. Well, did any particular event happen that set your mind to this subject that spurred what became your book?
Well, there was this really interesting moment, and I think it was in 2016. I was watching coverage of I think it was the Republican convention, and they had Newt Gingrich on, and he said, crime is up all over the country. And the CNN anchor said, well, it's not actually, it's down. That's a fact. And he said, well, people feel like crime is up, and that's also a fact. And I thought, what is that? What is that? There are facts, and then there are feelings, right? But if feelings are facts now, right, that's a very strange world to enter. And feelings are the purview of fiction writers, right? We often, when we write history, or the news, we take into account the feelings of the participants, but not the feelings of the readers, right? Like, you don't sell news to people based on how they feel about the news, but of course they do now. And
yeah,
so
they do.
and so, we're into this reality in which your feeling is a fact and my feelings are facts, and they're just as real, if not more real to you, as the evidence or proof of reality. So, that's the challenge, both for storytellers today, but also, for these characters as they move through this reality.
I wondered, as I was paging through the book again, if you saw, if some of your characters, you base them on anybody in your real world. For example, Simon. Was there a Simon in your world?
No, I mean, Simon is a 15-year-old boy. He's a very wealthy boy. He's the son of what in our world would be a Sackler, big pharma family. And, his older sister commits suicide at the beginning of the book. And what his parents do is they basically turn her room into a gift wrapping room. and they never speak of her again, right? And here's this boy who has all these feelings about his sister who died, and no one will talk to him about it, the level of denial. And so he develops some real anxiety and ends up in a sort of an anxiety center for rich kids, and in which he meets these other characters and they go on this journey. I mean, look, I have kids, my kids are anxious, all their friends are anxious. Like, it's very hard to find a teenager today who's like, no, I'm cool, it's all good. Everyone is really amped up. And of course, we were teenagers, and what is a teenager except someone who turns everything up to 11, right? Emotionally. But at the same time, like, there's a lot of stuff that's already at 12. So, it's a challenge.
It's true. Yeah. When you were mentioning Simon and going to the float treatment center, which I think is here in Chicago, supposedly, and he's under the care of a lot of drugs, or the abuse of a lot of drugs, depending on how you look at it. Do you see that's going on a lot in our world, that kids are being over medicated?
It's always hard to know. And I have kids who have some anxiety, they've got some ADD, and the question is, when should you give them something, if at all, and what are those things, and how do you monitor them? And it's a part of parenting I was not expecting, right? Which is, we have these amazing tools to help people, but you just have to balance it all. And certainly I know adults my age who told me, oh yeah, I had ADD, and when I went to college, I just took all the Adderall I could and partied. And you're like, okay, well, that's not an argument for Adderall. And it's just part of the self-care. We're just trying to teach our kids how to care for themselves, because they're going to have to do it themselves one day. And I think that's, that's the challenge that we're all facing. And I found myself increasingly, as I become a parent, the work becomes about that, about parenting, about children, about how we're raising them. Before the Fall was very much about that, and this last season of Fargo was very much about that. If you wanted to know who was a moral person or not, just look at their relationship to the children in the story, right? Like, it's very easy to figure out who you should root for, because they were the ones who were good to the children. So it's a concern.
Certainly is. I have a question for you that I probably have to admit is kind of from me. Whose praise is the most gratifying to you as an author? I mean, you've gotten so many awards for everything you've done in film and now with literature. What feels the best?
Well, certainly the artists that I have looked up to, I sent this book. I don't know Stephen King, but I've had a couple of exchanges with him over the years. And he said nice things about Fargo, and there's a huge homage to The Stand in this book. There's a character who chooses to call himself Randall Flagg, and so I sent the book to Stephen, and he sent me a really lovely note about it, and that's very meaningful, or when the Coen brothers are kind to me, or I mean, I'm always amazed when I go around and I get to meet with famous directors or writers or actors who seem to really love the work that I've done. I don't take it for granted at all. I'm always actually a little startled. So that's very meaningful to me, certainly.
Oh, that's good. Didn't know if it would be like your third grade teacher who encouraged you to
That bastard? No. No, it's like, look, I mean, my kids are too young to read the work. So, and, I mean, look, the people we love, it's always meaningful, their praise. And, all any of us really want is for dad to say he's proud of us, right? My dad's not around anymore, so I'll take Stephen King, I guess.
Yeah. So when we introduce your books to our customers, is there anything that you would really hope that we mention in making sure that they are spurred on and enjoy what they're going to get?
Well, it's interesting. I started a few years back with a book I wrote called The Good Father. I started to talk about the books as emotional thrillers, right? And I tend to find that people just have put me in the thriller category, which is great, but I tend to think of them as emotional thrillers. And what I mean by that, the first book I wrote was called Conspiracy of Tall Men, and it was about a professor of conspiracy theories whose wife is killed in a plane crash, and he goes on this journey to figure out what happened. And what I realized then at that age as a young man with literary pretensions is that plot is really difficult, right? It's like to write a page turner that's also literary is a greater challenge on some level than to write either a page turner or a literary novel, But the danger that you get into in writing something that has a real plot to it is that at a certain point the plot takes over the book, right? And you find yourself in the home stretch, and you've set all this stuff up, and you got to pay it off, and this guy's running from that guy, and it's not necessarily emotionally rewarding. So what I started to think about is I'd love to write a page turner in which what you really care about at the end of the day is how these people are, how they do, So, for example, Before the Fall, right? There's a mystery at the center. Before the Fall is like, there's a plane crash. Why did the plane go down, right? But the hero of the book, the painter who's on the plane, he's not a detective. He's not solving that, right? He's on a different journey. You, the reader, want to know what the solution to the mystery is, but this guy's just trying to get okay with the world. So, do you know what I mean? Like, so in the end, the mystery is going to be solved or not, but hopefully what you're really invested in is, is this man and this child, are they going to be okay? And so that's, and I think those are ultimately more satisfying, books that you can really connect with, which are emotional and character driven, and they give you the thrill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, this one certainly fills the bill in that way.
Well, good.
Well, I'll jump in because I'm just super interested, Noah. I have younger kids as well. How do you find your writing changing as you get, as your kids get older, as you hit more of those milestones?
Yeah, I mean, on some level, the training wheels come off, right? At a certain point, the faith in your own ability, what I found increasingly, and this happens in the film and television work as well, is I don't want to know too much. I want to find it on the page. I want to write it as if I'm reading it, or write it as if I'm watching it. And that faith that I'm going to stick that landing, I mean, that I'll write something in chapter 4 that'll pay off in chapter 10, even though I have no idea how it's going to pay off, but I've learned from my craft that it's in there somewhere, right? Subconsciously, I know what I'm doing, or not, or I'll figure it out later. But yeah, I mean, I do think there's something, there's this section of Anthem, in which, I talk about the challenge for our kids, right? We have these kids and they come and they're like, oh, look, the world, tell me about this world. And then, we go, okay, all right, so slavery. Okay, and then we go, okay, but finish your breakfast and now let's go to school, and then, you know, how was your day, and the Holocaust, or, you know, or they see homeless people on the streets, right? And you go, well, that's just a part of the world. That's just, you just have to get used to that, homeless people on the street, right? Like, it's so, when you look at it from their point of view, right? We spend so much time telling our kids how complicated everything is. You know, gun violence is really complicated. Climate change is really complicated. And then, you know, Greta Thunberg stands up at the UN and she's like, it's not complicated at all. The planet raises in temperature or it doesn't. It's binary. It's not complicated at all. And so I think a big part of what being a parent has done conversely is make me see the world through children's eyes more.
Right. Right. Well, and it's almost like we overcomplicate it, but there's a balance there between that simplicity of it, but also then helping them to understand the other factors that go into somebody else's response to that, right?
Yes. Well, and of course there are complexities, and it's, you know, that's the challenge, right? The challenge of it is, you know, and I say at the end of the book, like, you know, we have an empathy problem, but is the problem that we don't have enough empathy for each other, or is empathy itself not the solution? Because empathy doesn't scale. I feel empathy for you, the two of you, the three of you, we get to 10, 50, 100 people. It doesn't work anymore, you know, empathy. And so, you know, how do we approach those? You know, it's like the scale of our problems just got so big, and we're not good at that. Our brains aren't good at scaling up to that. So, you know, we need to find a better solution.
Right. Well, and I think if you agree that the scale of the problems there's the issue of how social media and our connectivity across the world means that we are able to understand, or at least know of, issues that are happening that, you know, 100 years ago, your average 13-year-old in the middle of the Midwest is not going to have heard about. Right. So then how do you explain, you know, Russia and the Ukraine
right,
when your kid hears about it, when they wouldn't have heard about it at another time? Right.
Well, and the volume, right, of information that not only do you feel obligated to absorb, but, you know, then you have to process on some level. And you know, and the other danger, you know, of course, is that we're in this bifurcated reality, right, where, you know, in real time on Twitter, you're watching those feelings become facts, right? So we're seeing events with our eyes and we're thinking, oh, that's what happened. And then other people are watching them and their takeaway is totally different. So in real time, you're seeing the reality and the conspiracy theory created simultaneously, right? And so if the first draft of history is fiction, then what's the role of the fiction writer? Because we're supposed to come along later, interpret fact into meaning, right? But how are we? But now what has to happen is, you know, you have to have, say, the January 6th Commission come and now turn fiction back into fact, right? So then where's the fiction writer's role? So, you know, those are challenges. And that's how you end up with Kafka, right? You know, is that you end up with the state version of reality and other people's reality, and you end up in absurdity.
Right. So that actually dovetails right into a question I was going to bring up later that we've got from a viewer who says, feelings aren't facts, but feelings, if generalized, are information that can be important for the government, the market, et cetera. And individuals' feelings are stories. So how do you process all of that into a cohesive story, which I think you touched on a little bit there, but I don't know if that question brings up any additional thoughts for you.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I feel like I'm good at in certain, you know, and I think about this more on the screen than on the page, is to be able to understand in real time where the audience's head is at, right? What do they think is happening? What do they want to happen? What are their feelings about what's happening? What are their expectations for what they want to happen next? And then to go, okay, well, I know they want, you know, they want white hat versus black hat in the town square, but we're not going to give them that. So, but I know that they want it. So, you know, I have to I have to make them happy with something different, something original, and so I think it's important, to understand. It's like human beings, what do we like? We like love to work out. We like families to stay together. You know what I mean? There are things that we like that if we don't get them, we're not happy,
Right.
and we like to feel safe and all of these things. And unfortunately, because we're so predictable, we're also very manipulatable. You know what I mean? We're easy to manipulate on that level. Kurt Vonnegut used to say, he never put a love story in anything because he said love stories just make people stupid, right? Like the moment you put a love story in something, it's all anybody cares about, and I think that's interesting to think about that, and on some level it's true. So yeah, I do think feelings are important, and I think in this country, certainly a large percentage of our population's feelings have been ignored for a long time, and what's important to them, et cetera. But that doesn't mean that their feelings about facts are also facts.
Right. Yeah. There's a big difference there that I think we're all kind of discovering a bit in real time, as you say.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I have a couple of questions here that, unless Sue, if you've got one more, just let me know. Were you worried about creating a dark novel in such dark times?
Well, I mean, always, but on some level, I'm not an earnest writer, right? I'm a very playful writer, and I think that definitely comes out in the shape of this book. And also, that's where the magic realism that exists in this book came from, because in revisiting Marquez and 100 Years of Solitude, it's like so much tragedy in that book. It's so beautiful. It's like really dark things, and yet the world is a magical place. And so there's a sense of perspective and of history that makes it okay. Like, it doesn't feel dark when you read that book, even though so much of it is dark. And it's always the challenge, but it's sort of amazing when you look at books that no one expects to do well, in which there's so much suffering in them, and yet they connect with people because they feel seen, their trauma is seen and their anxiety is seen and all that. And I guess it's sort of why I put myself in the book as the author. The book starts with an author's note and it ends with an author's note, and I come along in the middle to apologize for this book that I've written because I know it's ridiculous. But what I'm really doing is saying, look, I'm not going to hide behind this book, right? I'm worried, you're worried, and I'm going to tell you the story because I'm trying to figure out what I'm worried about and what we can do about it, and let's talk about it. I didn't hide behind the fiction of it. I put myself out there, because I thought it is a dark book, and yet it is an honest attempt to process, the absurdity of my surroundings. Absurd and ridiculous, not comedically. That's not funny. You know what I mean? But as I say in the book, when the president gives a speech in the rain and then says that it was sunny and yells at anyone who says, what is that if not absurd?
Right.
It's like, it was raining. What's the big deal? But no, it wasn't raining. And if you show him a picture of the rain, he'll tell you you're crazy. So, that's
Right.
That's the world the book lives in, and it's the world that we live in.
Well, I think the honesty that you mentioned in is the key there, right? Like, people if they don't feel that honesty and they don't feel that realness, that they're not going to be able to relate to the book. But I think of Station 11, out before the pandemic, but is a story about a pandemic and what happens. And then, of course, the show that I just finished watching myself. But we had, and Sue, you can attest to this as well. When the pandemic first hit, all of our best-selling books for a while were books about pandemics.
Right. Yeah.
That's, people wanted to know, even if it was fictionalized, somebody tell me how we get through this, or at least how someone
Right.
reacted to it. We need that path
Yeah.
to follow.
Yeah.
And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I think so. And you know, I mean, book readers are already um, volunteering to have a more serious conversation than non-book readers. You know what I mean? Like
Yes.
on some level, they want to think deeper about the world and the people in it. And all I'm ever trying to do as a fiction writer is to recreate reality so that I can hold it up and go, did I get that right? You know, like, why is this person that I know like that? Well, let me try to create a character who does similar things and see if I can fictionally figure out why a person would be like that. And you know, I think that's what people are looking for. And you know, it's not that something is serious, you know, but if something is humorless, you know, if something is brutal, there's not, you know, you're narrowing down your audience. And you know, there's certain times a year that they're open to that and other times they're not. And
Right.
you know, so I just really tried to you know, to create something that that was both serious and fun at the same time.
Sure. Maureen would like to know why you picked our area of Chicagoland to set the book's location.
Well, you know, I spent a lot of time there in the last couple of years. We made that 4th season of Fargo up there. And so I traveled all around pretending it was 1950. So there are a lot of parts of town I never went to because it doesn't look like 1950 anymore. But you know, it reminded me, because I'm a New Yorker, right? And I, you know, I have lived for the last decade or so in Austin and before that in LA and San Francisco. But you forget the northern city, you know, is such a specific thing, you know, the sort of northern industrial cities that these are old places in America, and they have, I don't know, there's a real dignity to Chicago, and there's also a scrappiness, you know what I mean? It's like, we're not above having a little fight now and then, you know? And so I don't know.
No, we are not.
Yeah. So yeah, there was just something that felt like, you know, I mean, you certainly have your Tony suburbs and yet, you know, people are more grounded because the city's so close and they're just a little more street smart, it feels like. So.
Well, we'll take that. We will take being called street smart here in suburban, right? So
Yeah.
I have a question. Can I put one in here? Is it hard to decide whether to channel your energies toward writing versus film kinds of things?
It's not hard. I mean, I have the luxury of being able to do all of them, which is great. You know, fiction takes the most time in terms of months and years and to get a book written, and I don't have that time consecutively, you know. So what I have is, you know, if I have 3 months that I can write 100 pages of a book and then come back to it, you know, 8 months, 10 months later, you know, I need to have written enough so that I can sit down and read and go, oh, that's what I was thinking, and here's the voice and all of that. But no, I mean, I guess early on I kind of rejected the principle that I had to choose, and on some level also because I understood that if you only do one thing, that thing has power over you, right? If the TV business dries up and you've given up the other things, then, you know, you're kind of screwed. So I just kept going, you know, and I think what still excites me every morning is like, what am I writing today? Like, what story am I telling today? And you know, so that just keeps me moving. It keeps me prolific, but you know, I'm not trying to outrun anyone. I just have a lot of thoughts.
Well, again, you've dovetailed very nicely both into the next question we have from a viewer who says, somebody who's also a writer,
Yeah.
actually someone who met you a while ago, and it was advice on trying to sort of do it all for a career. Like if they do well with a novel, can that be leveraged for screenwriting, and sort of vice versa? And did you ever run into anybody, managers or agents or things like that, who frown on you for wanting to do both of those things?
No, I mean, any agent's favorite client is the one who gets themselves work, right? And there was this sort of fascinating thing when I sort of went sideways into the television business from being a novelist, where you realize that like the television business is built on it's a ladder, right? There's a hierarchy. People come in at the lowest level, staff writers, and they work their way up the line. But what is television? Television is a medium in which most writers spend their whole careers writing in someone else's voice, right? So what happens is, after a few years where all you've been doing is writing in someone else's voice, the industry decides, well, they must just not have a voice of their own, right? And so they're like, but who has original ideas? Fiction writers have original ideas, or movie writers have original ideas. And so they're always looking to those other medium for their show creators on some level, and which is a crock, because of course people who write for television shows have their own ideas and their own voices, etc. But there is a bias kind of built into it. So I use that to my advantage, certainly, and have managed to not be pigeonholed. I can make a show like Fargo, or a show like Legion, which is nothing like Fargo, or Lucy in the Sky, or do a show called Alien, based on Ridley's movie, and you wouldn't, if someone told you the Fargo guys do an Alien, you wouldn't think that's a good fit, right? But yet I always say you gotta be good enough to get in the room. You got to be good in the room, and you got to deliver when you leave the room. And if you do those things, then they tend to think what I think, which is, if someone's talented, they should be able to do anything unless they prove otherwise.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question here. Both earnestness and knowing how to anticipate audience feelings about a story and then decide to move in another direction are themes of what you mentioned tonight. Can you talk about coming to a place where those and other more complicating factors are balanced and feel meaningful? When do you know it's time to start putting pen to paper, or do you put them all down and take it from there? That's a lot of questions, but get into some of those themes.
But that's okay. I mean, it's sort of a question that reflects my process in a way, which is, it's a lot of things in a lot of different directions. I employ a full-time researcher, right? And a lot of writers do. I mean, Elmore Leonard had one, but I will send, emails like, oh, I'm really interested in sovereign citizens, this alt-right movement. Can tell me everything you can about sovereign citizens. And then I'll say, okay, well, but I'm also really interested in this medieval thing, or, and so invariably I end up, someone just dropped off this binder for me for this next Fargo, which is already, it's about 300 pages of research, and so all that goes in there, right? Thematically. And then the question is, how do you turn that into story? So my first novel, I had studied sort of paranoia in American politics in college. And then in the 90s, I watched The X-Files, and it seemed that this paranoia is cyclical. And I thought, okay, well, here we go again. What are Americans so afraid of, right? And then I thought, oh, well, that's interesting. What story could I tell that would allow me to explore that thematically? And I thought, okay, well, DeLillo did the professor of Hitler studies in White Noise. Like, what if I did a professor of conspiracy theories? And that would allow me to explore, like, well, why is this guy? Because, when you believe in conspiracies, what you believe in is that someone is responsible. An act of God is never an act of God, and so there's always someone to blame for everything. So that became a story through which I could explore that thematically. So, I have a set of characters who pop into my head. I have a whole lot of themes and ideas that I research. I have a tone of voice, and then I have to figure out the structure of it, right? Because the story tells you how it wants to be told. A show like Legion, which is about a man who may be schizophrenic and sees things that may not be real and hears things that may not be real, that should be the audience's experience, right? The narrator becomes unreliable, the show becomes surreal, and that's dictated by the story itself. So, it's kind of a hot mess that I figured out how to turn into something.
And there's the title of your next book, right? Hot mess that turns into something. Oh, and I like how you have reminders about this, and but you're like, medieval this and that, and then also aliens, like you threw that in for.
Look, I love those movies, and there's something about horror itself, since I've gone from writing to filmmaking, the horror genre is arguably the most cinematic because there's so little dialogue in it. It's all about the experience of the visual and what you're hearing and what you're not seeing, and so it's sort of fascinating to construct that. So yeah, look, my motto is, what else can I get away with? And until someone stops me, I'm just gonna keep going.
Sure. Well, it also strikes me as the hallmark of a curious mind, right? Which if you just keep your mind open to all these interesting things, you're going to find something really fascinating about, medieval architecture or something. Just pull something random out. And with the right talent, of course, you can make that into a story about even modern day things. So I think that's really amazing.
Yeah.
All right. Well, very excited about the new Fargo. I know we were going to ask about that anyway. Not that it relates to the book, but we do have some comments in the chat about it. So, and lots of great things to say, of course, about Anthem as well. So just want you to know those are there. So another question, your stories always feel very centered. Do the stories help you find that center, which I think is really about, your craft versus your own sense, right?
Yeah, I feel very uncentered when I'm not in the middle of a story. And some of that, I think, is because the story for me is really this selfish way for me to try to understand the world. And so if I'm not engaged and actively trying to understand it, I can end up feeling pretty unmoored. But I also know that, we have this downtime for a reason, and we need to refill the cup and all those things. And now I have kids that I like, and spouse that I like, and I've learned to take time off and all those things. So there's a lot more balance to it. But I also find it's sort of easier to turn on and off than it used to be. I'm not worried anymore if I turn it off that it's not going to come back on. It's like
right.
I can take the weekend, and I know during the weekend I'll have some idle thoughts. I'll make a couple of notes, but Monday morning I'll be ready to go. I'm not worried about that anymore.
Good. Yes. Well, I think we'd all appreciate when, writing down those idle thoughts, and whenever you come back Monday being full, because we're looking forward to those next things.
Good.
So what do you have coming up else that you're working on right now?
Well, yes, it's very busy. We're going to do another Fargo. I'll probably be, we're starting to write. I'll probably be filming in the fall, and then, we're finishing scripts for Alien, and we'll be filming that early next year. So there's a lot. It's going to be a busy couple of years. I don't currently have another book in mind, but it takes a while to brew these things. What's a script? It's 50 pages. What's a book? It's 400 pages, single spaced. It's a lot more. No, it's an interesting moment, even arguably more so than I was facing in 2018. There is a lot of uncertainty. So, I need a story that that isn't going to go away on me in a couple of years. You know what I mean? So,
Right. Yeah. Cause you've
Yeah.
got some things lining up right before then.
yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Well, Sue, to sort of wrap up here, unless other folks have some questions in the chat, when you hand this book to somebody at Sue in the bookstore, what are the things that you tell them that you want them to walk away with after you read this book? And then I'd love to hear the same from you, Noah.
yeah.
Oh. Well, I guess I want them to be blown away by the timeliness of it, because I know that they will be. He's got so much in there that's so appropriate to what's coming, you know, has been in the news. And so I think that's very captivating. The very beginning, even though it's horrifying, it catches you and will not let you go. Just knowing that these young people are committing suicide in droves, you can't look away from the book at that point. You have to know what's going on and why this is happening. And as it was kind of an eye-opener for me to think about, again, what we're handing our children and the things that they're going to have to inherit from us if we don't face it and do something to make a lot of issues improve. What I guess I would want them to come away with is a little bit of inspiration and maybe the desire to get involved in that change.
Yeah, I mean, I look at, I think of it as an adventure story, and a sort of fantasy novel about our real America, or a realistic novel about the fantasy world that we live in, and as a result, but you look at a book like Lord of the Rings or whatever, it's like, if they have to go on this quest, because if they didn't, it's not like Sauron would hurt people's feelings, right? I mean, the stakes have to be high, you can't save the world if it's like, well, it'll be okay if we don't save it, so on some level, the seriousness of the opening is the motivation that they, and on some level, it's to say, this moment where our teenagers realize we're not going to save them. They have to save themselves. And that becomes the book.
Right. Amazing. Well, I know this is a book that is full of so many things that we could dive into here, but, we also want to make sure people have the opportunity to really experience those as they read it, though I know a lot of folks on here have already read it. So anything else you want to leave us with, Noah?
No, I just saw, when I'm in Chicago, you'll see me. I'll come by.
Oh, please, remembering that we do like to fight, but really only if we get into a conversation about pizza.
That's okay.
That's right.
That's okay. I can fight about pizza with the best of them. So
excellent. Well, see, that to me just means we have to go on a pizza tour, right? So we have to prove, but by eating all the pizza, that's kind of where I go.
I'm in.
Over good books, of course. Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Here in Chicago, the weather is dicey. I think we're starting to get some rain now too. So I know it's a good night to sit and curl up with a good book, and hopefully Anthem is on your short list for that.
All right. Well, thank you.
Yes. For those of you who did order a copy of the book, we'll shoot you an email through Event Combo when those are ready for you to pick up and or ship out. So just stay tuned for that. But everybody be safe out there, and hopefully we'll see you again soon, wherever that may be. And best of luck with everything, Noah. Thank you so much for being with us. And thanks, Sue, for moderating. Have a great night, everybody.
Thank you.
Good night, Noah.
Bye-bye.